Well, aloha everyone, and welcome back to Human Biology here at Chaminade University. Today we're going to delve into the reproductive system, which is Module 9b, and the last module in your course. All right, so what's the purpose of the reproductive system? Well, the purpose of the reproductive system is to be able to create genetically unique offspring, and we do that by creating gametes. Gametes are going to be haploid cells that are made through the process of meiosis. Remember, our normal process of cellular division is mitosis. During mitosis, we're going to make two identical cells that are both identical to the mother cell. The daughter cells are both identical to the parental cell. Here in meiosis, we're going to be creating haploid gametes that only have half of the genetic material of the parent, and then we're going to be having them come together during a process called fertilization, where we're going to restore the genetic complement. And that means that we're going to be putting together the gametes from the mother and from the father and creating an entirely new genetically unique zygote. All right, I know I just threw a bunch of terms at you. Let's start with what gametes are. So again, gametes are haploid. They have half of the genetic material of any of the normal cells, which would be like your somatic cells, would be the rest of your cells in your body, like your skin cells, etc. But your sperm cells and your egg cells, those are called gametes, and they are haploid. They are created by the process called gametogenesis, which is where we are going to undergo the process of cellular division in a strange way called meiosis, where we're going to, again, double once, but then halve twice. So if we undergo one cellular reproduction event and then two division events, we're going to get to half the amount of DNA that we started with. And that means that we're going to have 23 chromosomes. And normally we're going to have diploid cells that are going to be 46 chromosomes. That's going to be our somatic cells, but the haploid cells, again, the sperm and the egg, are going to have 23. We have specialty cells that are germ cells that are going to lead to the creation of the chromosomes. So they're going to be responsible for creating the sperm and the egg. They're going to be the ones that are going to be responsible for this happening again in the gonads. The gonads are going to be organs called the testes or the ovaries, depending on whether you're male or female, where we're going to be undergoing spermatogenesis or the creation of your eggs, right? So again, this is going to happen in specialty regions of the body. So let's talk about the male reproductive system first. These testes here, let's start here. This is where the process of spermatogenesis occurs. So this is where our haploid cells are constantly being created. And then they're going to mature, and an accessory organ here called the epididymis. So here's the caput, corpus, and caudal epididymis. By the caudal epididymis, they've gained their tails and their ability to fertilize the egg. Then they're going to end up leaving through the ejaculate. Now, the ejaculate has to go through this long tube called the vas deferens. The vas deferens goes up and over the urinary bladder, then comes back down. It's going to pass through the seminal vesicles, where it's going to get extra fluid added, as well as passing through the prostate gland. Same thing, more fluid added. Also passing through this region here, which is going to have secretions by the bulbourethral glands. And then we have the entire urethra, and then it will exit out through the glans penis. So that's the actual direction of the sperm going from testes all the way through the ejaculate. Again, we have a lot of accessory sex glands that are going to be adding extra fluid to here, to this semen, including here the seminal vesicles, the ejaculatory ducts here that are going to run through the seminal vesicles are going to lead into here, the urethra. Same thing with the prostate gland. We're going to have some of the fluid from the ejaculatory duct, from the prostate gland, go out through the ejaculatory duct into, again, the urethra, and then the bulbourethral gland here leading into the urethra as well. Some of the physical support structures around that are going to include the scrotum. The scrotum is going to be this sac here that's going to hold the testes and the epididymis, vas deferens, etc. in location. It's going to be able to ascend or descend depending on temperature. So if it gets cold, it can go inside the body. And then when it gets too warm, it wants to dangle outside the body. It wants to maintain a lower temperature than the rest of the body. So if the body wants to be about 37 degrees Celsius, these guys want to be around 32 degrees Celsius. So they're going to be outside unless it's extremely cold. Here we have another view of these reproductive organs. Again, here we're going to have the testes, site of sperm creation, epididymis, site of sperm maturation, the vas deferens, site of sperm ejaculation, right? That has to go up and over the urinary bladder, goes over the ureter, down the back of the urinary bladder, and then we're going to have secretions coming in from the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, the bulbourethral gland, etc., all through these ejaculatory ducts, another set into the urethra. Then it's going to exit out through the urethra through the tip of the glans penis. All right, so the testes don't just produce sperm, they're also going to produce testosterone. Testosterone is a male circulating hormone that's going to provide the process of male differentiation and development. We also have several ductal regions that are responsible for assisting in the maturation of sperm. Again, we talked about the epididymis and its role in sperm maturation. So sperm are going to leave the testes, unable to fertilize the egg, unable to swim. And as they travel through the epididymis, which is one long tube, basically one long hose that goes back and forth, they're eventually going to reach the caudal epididymis where they've gained fertilizing capacity. All right. Again, we also have those accessory glands. They're going to secrete accessory fluids. That seminal fluid is going to assist in the movement of sperm. And then again, the ejaculation is going to exit out through the penis. So that's going to be the passageway for ejaculation. I also want to point out here, it's also the excretion of urine pathway. So we're going to have this connected to the ureters and the urinary bladder. And so urine is also going to be able to come out through this exact same pathway, which is kind of important because it is going to be able to help kind of cleanse in between, etc. So the urine can actually wash out any of the residual seminal fluid from the ejaculation previously. All right. Again, the scrotum is going to be the sac that holds the testes. It's divided in half, so we have one sac for each of the testes, and we have the region called the raphe. I don't think that's discussed here, but the raphe is going to be the region that separates the two, R-A-F-E. We also have a lot of different types of smooth muscle and fascia, etc. Again, these are going to be responsible for contractile events that will lead to the testes going up into the body if it's too cold outside. Again, sperm production wants to maintain an internal temperature of about 32 degrees, so typically that's going to be outside of the body, but if it gets too cold outside and we drop too low, we are going to pull up inside of the body. All right, so let's delve into what the testes look like. So the testes are what's called a bilobed structure, right? We have two of them. They're going to sit inside the scrotum, and inside they're divided into what's called a lobule. So here's one lobule here. Each one of the lobules is going to have a series of seminiferous tubules. The seminiferous tubules have specialty cells that are going to produce sperm. So spermatogenic cells are going to be the ones that create sperm, but we also have special cells that we call kind of nurse cells, like Leydig cells and Sertoli cells, that are going to secrete the hormones that we need, testosterone. Again, this is a circulating hormone. It's going to be involved in sperm production, but it's involved in a lot of things in the rest of the body as well. And then also Sertoli cells, which are going to be responsible for supporting the process of spermatogenesis. All right, so I kind of talked about the overview of sperm. I said that it was created in the testes and then it went out to the epididymis. But this is the actual pathway of the sperm. So they're going to be created here in the seminiferous tubules, and then they're going to travel through the seminiferous tubules into the rete testes. This region here is the rete testes. The rete testes has a series of ducts that are going to feed directly. They're called efferent ductules. They're going to feed directly into the epididymis. Okay, this is the caput, or the head of the epididymis. Again, these sperm are not able to fertilize an egg yet. They're going to have to travel all the way through the epididymis to get the caudal epididymis to be able to gain what we call fertilizing capacity, or like the ability to swim and get to the egg itself. All right, after they travel through the epididymis, it takes about 2 weeks to gain fertilizing capacity. Then they're going to travel out during ejaculation through the vas deferens, through the ejaculatory duct, and then out through the urethra, through the glans penis for the process of ejaculation. All right, so we have accessory glands. Again, the seminal vesicles, prostate gland, bulbourethral gland. These guys are all going to feed into, so here we go, seminal vesicles, prostate glands, and then here's a bulbourethral gland. They're all going to feed into the ejaculate as well, which again all feeds into the spongy urethra here. Why do we need all of these other things coming from the accessory organs? Well, the seminal vesicles have a specialty fluid, a milky fluid, that's going to be alkaline. And this is important because, as I just mentioned, we also share this path with urine, and urine is going to have an acidic content. So the alkalinity of the seminal vesicles is going to help neutralize this whole pathway to help protect sperm from the acidic environment that might have happened when we urinated previously. It also is going to have a high concentration of sugar, so lots of fructose. It's going to help feed these sperm as they swim along, like they're little marathon swimmers trying to get to the end of his goal, which is obviously the egg. And this fructose or sugar is going to be really useful to create ATP, right? Remember, we're going to need a lot of ATP to get that sperm tail constantly moving, and we've got a long, long swim that we have to go through to be able to get to the egg. We've got to go all the way through the vaginal canal, through the cervical mucus, through the uterus, all the way up through the fallopian tubes, which if you picture something that's microscopically small, this is an astronomically large swim for them. So they're going to need a lot of ATP to keep that sperm tail or flagella flagella moving. It also is going to contain prostaglandins. Prostaglandins are going to help with the mobility of the sperm as well as a contractile event in both the penis for the ejaculation, as well as in the female reproductive tract to help move the sperm forward. So prostaglandins are going to help with the process of contractions, which are going to help pull the sperm up towards their final goal, of course, being the egg. All right, the prostate gland also has prostatic fluid. Prostatic fluid is going to also mix in with the sperm, comes here from the prostate glands. It's going to include citric acid. Citric acid is going to help make sperm a little bit more awake, if you will, that it creates more ATP and they swim faster and swim. So citric acid helps activate their ability to, that's like the starting gun for the marathon, basically. We also have PSA, and PSA is going to help with the sperm passing through the cervical canal and the cervical mucus. We also use PSA to determine the levels of PSA are going to be directly related to how bad off someone might be if they have testicular cancer. So PSA levels are used with diagnostic techniques and treatment techniques for testicular cancer. Bulbourethral glands are going to be here. They're found just beneath the prostate on either side of the urethra. And there's going to be a specialty substance secreted from the bulbourethral glands that's going to neutralize the urethra prior to ejaculation. It's going to be a nice mucousy substance that helps lubricate the tip of the penis as well. So you may know this is pre-cum. This is going to help with the process of, again, making sure that this pathway is neutralized for ejaculation as well as lubrication for the event of actual intercourse itself. Again, we talked about spermatogenesis here, but let's just go into it a little bit further. We have a lot of different cells that assist in the process of spermatogenesis, again, Sertoli cells and Leydig cells. Now, Sertoli cells help maintain what's called the blood-testes barrier. The blood-testes barrier means that things are not going to necessarily pass out of the blood supply into the testes. We also are going to use Sertoli cells for spermatogenesis, so they're going to help create spermatogenesis. Again, here we have the Sertoli cells. The Sertoli cell is this yellow part here. It is what's going to surround, this is a spermatogonium, which is going to undergo the process of spermatogenesis, becoming the primary and secondary spermatocytes, eventually becoming the spermatids, and then they're going to have these little teeny tiny tails, eventually becoming the sperm cells. So this guy here in orange is the Sertoli cell, or the nurse cell, that helps support the process of spermatogenesis. It also produces androgen-binding proteins, and is going to be stimulated by something called FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, which we're also going to see in the female reproductive tract. And so that's why it's called FSH, because it stimulates the female reproductive tract to create the follicle to be stimulated. So it increases the follicle size and eventually the follicle rupture, which is what's going to lead to the process of the egg actually coming out of the ovary and being delivered into the infundibulum of the female reproductive tract, which is going to be the end part of the fallopian tubes. All right, I apologize. I got a little distracted there. So here we have also a little bit more about the Sertoli cells. They're going to also produce inhibin, and they also are going to destroy any improperly formed sperm. So any sperm that are going to be abnormally shaped are going to be degraded and recycled back. All of their parts are going to be broken down and utilized for other parts of the cell. Leydig cells are going to be responsible for producing testosterone. Testosterone is involved in the sperm production, but it's also involved in the maintenance of other secondary male sex characteristics. So it's going to circulate throughout the body, through the bloodstream, and have a profound impact on the sexual differentiation and development of the individual. All right, so this is the anatomy of a sperm. The sperm is split up into three major pieces: the head, the neck or the midpiece, and the tail. The sperm have a very condensed cell, so they do not have very much of like cytoplasm. They really are mainly going to be this nuclei. Here's a nucleus here. And then on top of the nucleus, there's this little tip here called the acrosome. The acrosome is filled with a bunch of enzymes like hyaluronic acid, etc., that are meant to help penetrate through the cumulus cells of the eggs. So the cumulus cells are tightly held together by a protein called hyaluronic acid, and this is going to be able to help break down that hyaluronic acid. We also are going to have surrounding that this plasma membrane, which helps maintain that acrosome until we get to the site of the cumulus cells, where we're going to be breaking down again the hyaluronic acid. We don't want to spill all of this juice until we get there. So we're going to have this plasma membrane that helps maintain this to prevent a premature acrosome reaction. Once the sperm does get there, if it's the lucky one that's going to penetrate the egg, we're going to lose the midpiece and the tail, and just the head is going to enter into the egg. That means, guys, that your mitochondria, which are found here in the tail, are not going to make it into your offspring. So when we look at the lineage of mitochondria, we're looking specifically at the maternal lineage, because only the mitochondria from the egg are going to make it into the offspring. Okay? All right, so we're going to move on to the female reproductive tract here. This is the external structures of the female reproductive tract, including, well, the structures of the vulva. So on the outside, we're going to have the labia majora. It's going to be the external folds or flaps. Then we have the labia minora, which is the internal folds or flaps. Then we're going to have the urethral opening. This is where the urine will come out of. The vaginal opening, where the baby is going to come out, and the site of vaginal intercourse, right? There's also a little hymen here if this individual has not had intercourse before. It's a little piece of membrane that may tear and bleed. And then the anus, where the rectum, where the poop or fecal matter will be coming out. And at the top here, we have a clitoral stimulation, basically, for sexual arousal. It's going to be covered by a little clitoral hood. It's got all of this amount of nervous tissue that the entire penis has, except it's all shrunk into this one little area. But again, the same amount of nervous tissue and a much smaller area means it's extremely sensitive. Let's see. I feel like we've touched on everything on the external structures, so let's move on here to some of the internal structures. All right, so here again, we're going to have the vaginal canal. So here, the labia majora and minora. This is where where we're going to have the vagina, basically. Here's going to be where the urine is going to come out. So this is the external urethral orifice. You can see the urethra is much, much shorter in a female than it was in a male. It had to travel the extent of the penis as well. So this is going to mean that this female is going to be much more likely to have something called a urinary tract infection or a UTI, because they have such a short length for the bacteria to travel as compared to the male, for example. All right, and so again, we're going to have the major, we just talked about these three major holes, and then this site of erectile stimulation, basically. Here's a little clitoris. It's going to be, again, erectile tissue with all of the same amount of nervous tissue that the entire tip of the penis would have, but it's going to have it all in one little area. So that, and then here's where the urine's going to be coming out, urethral orifice. This is the vagina, where the baby inside of vaginal intercourse, and then this is going to be the rectum, where the fecal matter is going to come out. All right, now let's focus on where the sperm is going to be deposited and how it's going to travel. So it'll be deposited here at the end of the vagina, and it's going to have to then travel through the cervix. So we're going to have a site of cervical mucus here. This region is called the cervical os, or the opening of the cervix. We're going to have to travel all the way through that, up through the uterus, and then take a left or a right. There's going to be two of these, into the fallopian tubes, then down into this region here, which is where we're going to have the eggs rupture off of the ovary and get caught in the fallopian tube. This is going to be the site of fertilization. Then the fertilized egg is going to roll all the way down. At that point, it's called a zygote. It's going to roll all the way down until it's going to implant here inside the uterus, where it's going to be the next happy home for the next 9 months. Okay, so that's kind of the overview, but we're going to go into it a little bit more depth, obviously. Ovaries are going to produce hormones as well as eggs, or oocytes, okay? Every month we're going to have one or the other ovary create an oocyte that will rupture out and end up in this region here, which is called the uterine tube or the fallopian tube, and it will be fertilized by sperm somewhere around here if it is lucky, and then it will end up embedding here in the uterus for a pregnancy to take place. If that does not occur, once a month this lining will be sloughed off and lather, rinse, repeat in order to make room for the next egg that's going to have ruptured from either of these ovaries. All right, so ovaries are also going to produce estrogen and progesterone, again, circulating female hormones. And the uterine tubes here are the site of both fertilization as well as transportation, hopefully of a fertilized oocyte, into the uterus. So this is going to be the bed or the hotel for the baby for the next 9 months if it is fertilized. Again, here's where the sperm are going to be deposited. Here's the cervical os, or cervical opening. Then we have to go through the cervical canal, through a lot of cervical mucus, which is going to be the first barrier to fertilization. Then we've got to go all the way up through the uterus, left or right. If some go left and some go right, but it's only ruptured on one side, we've lost half of our population in just a left or right choice. Then when we finally get here, so each of these stages is going to eliminate a massive amount of the sperm, right? Then when we finally get there, it's going to take a group effort, a concerted effort of multiple sperm to penetrate through the cumulus cells to be able to get to the oocyte, but only one is going to be able to deposit the nucleus inside of the egg itself. All right, again, the uterus is the site of implantation. So fertilization occurs here, then the egg is going to roll down and becomes implanted here of the fertilized ovum, right? Also of fetal development and of labor. So this is going to be a nice strong contractile tissue that can contract down. So it's elastic, it can swell out for the 9 months to grow and grow and grow, and then it can cause contractile events, repeated contractile events that can cause childbirth or labor, right? Again, the vagina is going to be the site both of childbirth as well as semen deposition after intercourse. And then the female mammary glands or milk glands are going to secrete milk, right? Synthesize and secrete milk. And we'll talk about those in just a bit. All right, so these are the ovaries. You've heard me use the word medulla and cortex many, many times, right? So the cortex is just going to be the outside. Medulla just means inside, right? The cortex is going to have the ovarian follicles, where we're going to have different ova. Each follicle contains one ovum, and when the ova ruptures, that's the process of ovulation, right? So FSH, or follicle stimulating hormone, which we just talked about in the male reproductive tract, becomes really important in the female reproductive tract as well, because it's going to be the reason why these follicles are going to become mature. But the cool thing about these follicles is that after they rupture, they're still kind of in control of your system, because the empty follicle itself is going to start secreting progesterone and other hormones that are going to inhibit the loss of the endometrium or the menstruation event, right? It's going to inhibit menstruation, hopefully waiting for this fertilized egg to make it into the endometrial lining, right? So this corpus luteum is going to be responsible for telling the uterus to hold off. We've just sent an egg out. Let's wait and see what happens. Hopefully it'll fertilize. And if fertilization occurs, the corpus luteum is going to be responsible for secreting hormones for the first 6 weeks, until the placenta takes over. After that point, the corpus luteum will degrade and the placenta will be responsible for the hormone secretions that are going to maintain the rest of the pregnancy. Okay, so what are the fallopian tubes? The fallopian tubes are these long tubes. They're about 4 to 5 inches. Remember, when you're a microscopic, 4 to 5 inches is a very long space to go, right? They are going to also be responsible for transporting the oocyte straight from the ovary. They are going to have cilia here, and they have smooth muscle as well that are going to line this whole area. We also have microvilli that are going to also help with moving things around, allowing the sperm to move one direction, or also allowing the fertilized egg to move towards the uterus for the site of implantation. All right, the 3 regions of the fallopian tubes are going to include the isthmus, which is this part here that connects to the uterus, the ampulla, which is where the fertilization event occurs usually, and then the infundibulum, and the infundibulum is where the ruptured follicle, right? So they're going to have that ova coming out of that ruptured follicle, or the egg, is going to come here into the infundibulum, be fertilized in the ampulla, and work its way down to the isthmus, where then it's going to be directed to its site of implantation in the endometrial layer of the uterus. The uterus has 3 layers. I haven't talked about that yet. We have the endometrial layer here, the myometrial layer, and the perimetrium. The perimetrium is the outer layer, myometrium is the muscular layer, endometrium is like the bed area, or the area when we're going to have the implantation occur. Again, the perimetrium is the external layer. It's a serosa layer. It's a serosa tissue. It's going to surround the fundus, and the fundus is the opposite side of the opening. So we've seen fundus before in the gallbladder, as well as in the digestive tract, in the belly, in the stomach, right? So here the fundus is the opposite end of the opening. And then we also have the body as well. All of this is surrounded by the perimetrial layer. Then we have the myometrium, that's the muscles, contracts during labor, stretches during pregnancy, and then also the endometrium, which is the actual site of implantation, and the site where the placenta is going to form if this baby is to implant and the pregnancy does take place. All right, so this is talking about how eggs are created. We have the process of oogenesis. So oogenesis is going to be a meiotic event. Meiosis, again, means that we're going to have one reproductive event, where we're going to double everything. We go from 46 to 92, and then we're going to have twice. So 1 doubling and 2 halving gets to haploid, okay? So every time that we undergo a meiotic event, we have meiosis 1 and then meiosis 2, we're going to end up with individual cells that are haploid. Now, typically we would end up with 4 haploid cells, but because the egg is so large, some of them are going to become polar bodies where they don't have any cytoplasm, and some of them are going to have stolen, or this mature secondary ovocyte is going to, I don't want to say stolen, but have acquired all of the cytoplasm of the other cells. So we have one very large haploid cell that is our secondary oocyte. So at the end of oogenesis, we end up with one cell that is going to be a very large cell that's going to be haploid.